Welcome to the DevReady Podcast. Joining me on the DevReady Podcast today, I have Diana Minnée. Thanks for joining me, Diana.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me. It's going to be hopefully a great conversation.
Yeah, I think it will be, and yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on. I'll let you introduce yourself because I will do a terrible job at that.
I always like to hear how other people introduce me, but I'll do it myself today. So I'm Diana, and I have a background in technology for a long time, and I've been working in startups for probably the last 10 years. I have been usually in the COO role, Chief Operating Officer role there, and the last 5 years or so, I've been a fractional COO for startups. But for this year in particular, I've been focusing on my own startup as well as the CEO of Astronort. So that's my history of that in a nutshell.
Okay, so maybe tackle just the startup a little bit. So what are you focusing on Astronort, and what is it? What's a little bit of a background on that?
Yeah, it's very tied into all of those things, so it'll probably be a roundabout conversation. But ultimately, I would love to help executives and boards make better, more timely, more impactful decisions at that strategic layer. And it's very difficult to make strategic decisions. I think it's just an extremely challenging thing to do, especially with so much data and pace. And my experience as a COO, often I've had to bring what's the situation into the picture for the companies I've worked for. And I've been doing that every time, bringing that situation, bringing the scenarios, helping make those great decisions. But I feel like there's something we're missing. We need to be able to do this at scale and share that for those who can't afford a COO or don't have access to that type of thinking, because I feel quite a big responsibility to our employees and how they can do their best work. The strategic level of a company is where a lot of those heavy lifting decisions are made, and the impact of those decisions are really high on the people who work there, the success of that company, and they're the only ones who really are at that layer that can do that. So the better we get at that, I think the better ways we can work together, how people can actually enjoy their working environment as well, and the more successful we can all be. But I would say, and this will probably be a controversial, but most of us are terrible at making these decisions. Quite bad, to be honest. Yep. And if we were to do a measure of it, we've interviewed about 200 people over the last 6 months or so and in those exec roles, and I would say 90% of them say they are gut feeling, winging these decisions. So I'm keen to challenge that and try and have AI help us create a brain that can help them do that better by default. In many ways, I'm trying to trick them to be more strategic and make better decisions. So,
do you see a lot of the hesitation comes from being at that level and then maybe some accountability on making the decision? And then there's probably hesitancy to make the decision, but then not knowing what data is used to help support the decision probably, and that's why the gut feels there.
Exactly. And we have both sides of that equation. Sometimes people are too reactionary and they just decide without thinking about the impact of that. And It's like, hold on a moment. But equally, we have people who are quite risk adverse or don't want to make the wrong decision. So therefore, you have that over-analysis, gathering more data, and you get so much data. There's never enough to make a solid decision. So I like to think of it, getting it to be, what was Bezos was 70% certainty, go for that and make the decision. Yep. So about that, really, it's about balancing that decision making. You can still make a fast decision with the right information, but thankfully we have all of this knowledge coming at us now. Like, look at all the data we can provide ourselves, but it's become too fast, too much. So much noise in that data now for any business leader that you actually, to assimilate it and turn it into knowledge that you can act upon is just hugely difficult. So we're not going to be able to do that anymore, I think, any longer without technical help and support in using our fun AI brains is our goal. So
I think having that support, and I think that's what people need to remember, like the AI is there as it's a tool, or think of it as a virtual assistant almost, not the be-all and end-all that's going to solve all your problems. It's there to help you
Exactly.
support and process things and get things done quicker, not do your job for you.
No, and in fact, I'm sure everyone has tried ChatGPT, and trying to get anything that isn't generic out of it is very difficult.
Yep.
And so this is not a wrapper across ChatGPT by any sense of the imagination. And in fact, it's quite a small part of what we've built, but we're leaning on the LLMs to bring those foundational models to bring the context of reality to the situation. And something that I've thought of over the time is, in my time as a COO, I can context switch quite quickly because the pattern matching is there for about 70% of all businesses. And I think everyone likes to think they're a special unicorn, but ultimately hardly any of us are. So about 70%, if you're in business, is relatively similar. And I would say maybe 20% is about that company in that industry. And then this 10% that sits on the top, which is around the special unicorn parts, about the people involved, the culture, their customers, so very specific. So if I can have Astronaut hold that 70% at a minimum and possibly that 20% as well, we can, as humans, really hone in on the valuable parts of what we do that is really going to give us that edge in that 10%. That's my goal anyway.
Yep. And that's probably an approach that I've experienced in business anyway. It's focus, not the 70% that's common, but like the 70% that you're good at.
Yeah, that you really can push into, because that's where you're going to find that sharp strategic advantage. No one finds that in the day-to-day craft at all.
That's the stuff that you don't like doing either in the remaining part. So why not offload that to a tool that can help you get through that bit quicker and support you better?
And that's what I think about being more strategic means is, and that's a common thing that is happening a lot, is what is strategy? Often people ask, and the answer is so broad and so vast, but it's quite straightforward. We overcomplicate that. What it is where are you putting your stake in your ground? Like, where are you going to go? And why are you going to be the one that owns that piece of ground? Yep. What makes you better and faster and stronger and different? And then where are you now, and what's your journey going to look like to get there? To create an action plan to make those movements. So that then defines where you would invest your time, your resources, your money, and how quickly you can get there. So to me, that's pretty straightforward. But I would say if you ask, I have asked those 200 execs, and they all have a different answer. But we do think it's an extremely complicated thing that we need to go and have a big session on multiple times, create this amazing document. But ultimately now, the strategies can't keep up either. As you've seen with the last couple of years, the pace of change is so rapid that the moment you've minted that nice strategy document, it's out of date and you need to reassess it. So how might we have adaptive strategies? How might these decisions and impacts be incorporated on the fly really quickly? That's what Astronaut's going to be able to help with.
It's an exciting vision there, that the tools are changing that much where you can probably have to make big pivots in what you've been doing as well with what's been able to do, not just on the LLM side, but just in sort of the commoditization of the not language models, but machine learning and the tools that are becoming available. Because from my understanding, you'll have some machine learning algorithm there in the background, so the proper AI data science, not ChatGPT AI, which you probably just use to like formulate some reports based on the data that's coming from those tools.
Yes,
which is
it's a helpful tool to be able to assimilate and produce things quickly. But it's not the really meaty stuff itself. There are a lot of other things, and in fact, there's models upon models upon models upon code upon our own playbooks as well. Codifying what I've done as a COO and others have done as execs, and putting that perspective in there so it has a really good brain is going to make the difference. So I've had that question a lot, is like, how is this different from ChatGPT? And it's like, oh, if you only knew how painful it is to get it like this, but that's fine. I'm really happy that we're at this position now, and this is the first time, even though this idea has been with me for some time, it's the first time I think it's being able to be possible thanks to Gen AI and the movements around that. So
definitely, and I've had a similar experience in developing our own tool for our DevReady process that we go through, which is where the name comes from for the podcast. But it's more about implementing that knowledge and trying to codify something. And over the past 8 years, I've probably attempted 8 different systems in trying to do this. But the LLMs have enabled me to do it in a way that I couldn't imagine before.
Exactly. And this is the future of this, is we can now think differently, and even just how we can interact with this data will be entirely different. It will be intent based. It will know what you want before you even know it, like that type of situation. So the way we're building it is quite unusual, and our hope is it will tell you when things are changing and when things need to be looked at. So it's not about providing lots of BI dashboards. Mm-hmm. Nothing against BI dashboards, but they become quickly unwieldy and out of date. Yep. But it's just being able to say these things need your attention, and you know that to be true. That's really where we're heading, and it's to have confidence and trust in that is really hard with using AI tools. But we are endeavouring to get there at the very least.
Yeah, so. And the problem you're probably going to have at that level is not how do we use the tools. It's how do you curate the right amount of, or not the right amount of, the right data to be able to feed those tools correctly to help you make the right decisions. Because it's all data driven. So unless you've got processes in place to capture the data and record the right things, you'll be in trouble.
Definitely. And I've done quite a lot of work around mapping where this data exists already, because as you know, there's a lot of data in being produced at various levels of an organization. But what data makes a difference? And I've had to come all the way back to what is core. And if you think about what is core in every business, it's usually revenue and cost, right? Revenue and cost are almost like your two things that tie everything together, because it's either bringing in more value, more money, or else it's costing you something, either by hiring or building or investing, right? So so coming back to just this core data set and then going up from there and what impacts that, and adding those data sources in there as well. But one of the advantages with the AI tools these days is that you don't have to normalize that data, you don't have to convert it into some fancy thing, and it can bring those different and quite challenging. It's very hard to see your financial data and your human data and your your project data all in a view, and being able to query that. So what we've done is being able to, for instance, integrate with Xero that brings your P&L data through. And you can actually say, how are we going with our revenue this month? And it will just say, you've gained this much against budget, and here's your little graph. But you can also say, and how many people how many customers have left in the same conversation. So you can have a chat with that data, and it works really well together. But that's not something that just ChatGPT can do, or even just the tools that we have already. It's this bringing together of all of those disparate pieces of data.
Yep. And the tools just enable a faster version of getting that done, where before it had to be done by hand. You had to have teams to collate, curate, clean, transform, and get it presented into the system. So it's exciting times for sure.
Yeah, and there's always one exec who doesn't trust that anyway. Sorry, I shouldn't. There's always someone like in the crowd who goes, well, hang on a minute, I don't believe that, and they want to drill down into those things. But one of the advantages with Astronaut is you can say, tell me more, and that person who has that that issue can go and find more if they want to in the same way. But it's an exciting time to change the way we've been thinking, because ultimately we have a lot of our exec teams and our leaders in too much in the weeds in the day-to-day, whereas no one else has their job at the top table. Everyone else has at least other people to do those jobs for them. But this one job, we want them to be doing more of. But it's been they've done a big analysis on it, and 85% of leaders spend 1 hour a month on strategy, thinking strategically about where that company is going.
Yeah, and that's not a lot at all.
That is not a lot at all. And if our leaders whose job it is to think strategically about the future of that company and that long-term balance and success, and they're only spending that much time because they're too busy running reports about utilization, I think we've got trouble in our hands, and it's becoming more self-evident now because of the pace of change. And you've seen a lot of redundancies happen. You've seen a lot of businesses closing down. How could we have seen that sooner? What could we have acted on faster? How could we have lessened the impact of some of those things? I think that's what I'm interested in seeing, if we can provide any insight into the future of that. So
it's really at that top level support. And
exactly. I'm calling it exec tech because there's nothing in that camp.
Perfect.
Feel free to hashtag that one.
I think you've got the corner market on that term there.
Exactly. It's like, Gartner, please do a report on this. Because one thing I've realized is that each business area have their own tools, but how do you bring that together? And it's not just bringing it together into an OKR tool, and no offense to OKR tools. It's how does that executive team work together, or that board work together to say, well, given all this and the history of time, we can see the trend, we can see the patterns. If we are doing too many short-term decisions versus our long-term decisions, balancing that and the priorities. So I think there's a missing component here. We expect these execs to just make these great decisions, and CEOs hold that responsibility a lot. But what they do is usually hire me as a COO to be the brain to bring that together for them.
Yeah. So you're probably in a bit of a unique position in starting Astronaut with the multiple years, or you said I think it was about 10 years of working with startups and understanding these different growing pains, and then working with other organizations. Where do you see so you said fractional COO, how does that sort of fit in with what a startup needs to do? Because they probably have to understand how to structure the business before they can get to these exec tech tools, because they won't provide any value until they're set up right and operating in an efficient way. Yes.
So I've been a fractional COO for 5 years before this, and generally where people would approach me is in that seed to Series A moment. And I like to focus my attention on that, because that's usually where you've got past that moment where everyone's sleeping under their desk and taking options instead of money, and someone's given you a check to get you to the next stage. And it's like, excellent, right? So now that means you're starting to hire more people, and those previous set of humans that you've been working with, you've now got more, and you've got to explain that, and then there needs to be a leave policy, and all of these things start creeping in, and you're like, why is this not working like it used to? Yep. It's quite different just eyeballing 12 people and getting stuck in. Then now you've got even, I think, 15, 20 changes the tactics there, as well as that 25 to 35 moment. There's quite a lot happens within that, and it's very much the inception of how to operate your business is around that time, turning it into a grown-up business, but not so much that it's just swamping you operationally, and it's taking a lot of time and energy. You don't actually need a lot of human support there. So the fractional COO role has been hugely valuable at that moment. You can come with all of the history of time. I have a lot of templates that are just like, here's something I prepared earlier. Yep. And they kind of look at it like, wow, is that a thing? And I'm like, yep, everyone's got this. Here, use this. So getting them started, getting a bit more structure to it. It's ironic because I'm not very structured at all, that I've ended up becoming an operations person who structures things. But I think that's the very point. It's
more probably the systemization.
Yeah,
because you can document it.
Exactly. It's not what people think, and I think there's this unknown about what is operations. Ultimately, how I see operations is it something that we want to keep doing, and should we make it repeatable, and therefore should we turn it into a process or an automation or something that can be repeated by many, right? If it's not something that needs that happening, then why spend the time creating a process around it, or a practice, or it's just, this thing is working, let's do more of that, let us all do more of that, here's how we will do it. So it's quite simple. And that might be, what's our approach to hiring? Well, that's a good point. We haven't really got an approach to hiring. Maybe we should think that through. Let's write that down. That's your process, right, to get you started. And you refine and you adapt those things. So it's just finding those things that give you a little bit more scaffolding around the crazy that is a startup, and making it feel like you're being more intentional about those things.
Because if you're an early, say, pre-seed startup, you're just focused on the solution and product market fit. Once you're at that point that you mentioned, so after seed, you've got some funding, you're at maybe another funding round or whatever it may be. But now you're, like you said, 15, 20 people. You have to start managing the people, not just managing the work.
Yes.
So it's about the team, culture. It's not just SOPs.
Exactly.
You can write SOPs all day long.
Oh my goodness. And I hardly write any, to be honest, I'm telling you now. Most of the time, and the first thing is when I say to a CEO, what is it that you want to do more of? They usually have, I want to go and talk to customers more, I want to sell more, I want to be more strategic with my business, I want to spend time with my board. And I said, what do you want to do less of? And I've worked with many, and the number one thing they want to take off their plate is people management, which I'm often surprised at. To me, that's one of the key things. But but every single one of them has said that to me. And so what that means, though, is not managing people. They actually like people. They love these people. But they don't know how to deal with the friction, the problems that they're facing now, either through the performance that used to be great when they were in the pre-seed moment has now tapered off, or those people used to work really well, but now they're not fitting with the where that company is going, or just how to move them from one state to another. So that's usually number one, what they want to take off their plate. So
I can understand that. So my business partner and I'm very technical, so I focus on solutions and architecture, and he manages the team and works on the culture. I input, but I don't do one-on-ones with the team. I give feedback, but I don't do that yet. I'm not that side, so I can relate to that sort of feeling.
Yes. So I think that's where usually a lot of those issues start presenting themselves, is when you start feeling this slight things aren't quite right, they're not working as well as you could do. So that's generally where a role like a COO could come in. One of the reasons I became a fractional COO was because when people can afford a COO, it's quite late in the piece, closer to the Series A moment than or in the Series A moment. And I every time I would get into an organization at that level full time as the COO, we usually spent about a year unpicking what they'd done up until that point to get it to be really humming. No offense to those people, it's just timing wise they had nothing more that they could do. And again, I was thinking, how do I get in earlier? I need to be there at this moment instead of that moment. How do I make myself more affordable? And really that's where I decided at that time to steal what CFOs were doing. They were wildly being virtual CFOs, had a really great model, and I'm like, why aren't we doing this for all the other roles too? So I just kind of stole it and put it out there, and within 20 minutes I had my first customer, and off we went. And then fractional has become really trendy over the last year and a half. And I do actually think it's the future way we could build exec teams. Can you imagine a new way of working where our leadership teams were actually there for a period of time and where they do their best, and they were rewarded for how they could pass the baton to the people to do the next phase? I know I'm really great in that seed to Series A phase, and I can do before and I can do after, but I would feel extremely happy to be able to hand the baton to someone who's in the scaling mode and high five them and get the reward for that.
You have to operate differently. There's different sort of energy, different mindset, different focus, different things. So if you enjoy being in that pocket, focus on that area because that's what you do best. So that does make sense.
Exactly. Imagine it, and imagine celebrating that and moving organizations through that moment and knowing that, hey, we're here now and I can't wait to bring our new person to do this phase. I think that would be a wonderful future. But that's how I came into doing COO work, is and the timing of that's when the pain is. So I think if I was talking to CEOs of startups out there, if they're starting to feel that friction of things feel a little bit janky and that the pre-seed way of working is no longer working in that next phase, that's when I'd start to look at fractional work or ways of getting a COO in there to help support them, because it's usually a really critical time of how they are going to get through that moment really can define how they're going to scale. So
and it's having that fractional option just makes it more affordable for them. So you don't need the full-time role at that point either.
No,
you just need the support to help you push in the right direction, tell you, all right, these are the things you need to do, because if you're a first-time startup and you've never had that experience in running an organization or a team at that scale, level before, you don't have those skill sets. You're either normally, from our experience, a domain expert who's very technical and has done something in a specific area.
Exactly.
So you're really good at being like the mechanic who can do the work. Or you've just got an idea in a completely random domain and you're trying to do a startup in a different area and you think, all right, I've been successful as doing business A, I'll move into this other one. So you don't have that exec team knowledge.
And the advantage of a COO is that they are a jack of all trades and a master of everything. Like, to be honest, the term key-shaped people is a common one, which is where they're actually deeply embedded in several things. So I came up through delivery and through products and projects and really mastering technical delivery, and then moved on to product and CES and infrastructure and architecture and like I've covered every possible thing that an organization can deal with. So I'm really solid at everything, including I was a CISO for a period of time. So everything, but I'm a specialist in probably 3 or 4 things. Whereas a lot of the time as subject matter experts, like if you're a product person, you're often, in that vertical, or chief technology officer, you're in this. Whereas a COO is able to jump in and put fires out and see what's coming and analyze the situation. So we're often seen, I like to think of it as we are balancing the system. So sometimes something might be on fire, so you have to jump in and fix that and get out. Or it might be this has got too much focus, whereas we need to start spinning the plate over here a little bit. So as a CEO, a COO can be a really great asset in helping run the company, the performance of that company. And I see it, I'm a systems thinker, I see it as all these nodes of the system working at once. I see it as 4D chess on a time continuum as well. So things moving this way and this way along a long time. So you're often bouncing from future state to now to the minute part of things to the maximum. It's great to. I would highly recommend people look at COOs if you're in that moment, because they'll just honestly get you sorted so quickly.
And having an external person come in fractionally, which is a day a week, a few hours every day, or whatever it may be, having that external viewpoint, being able to see from the outside into the way your organization's running and point out things that you can't see because it's either business as usual or the worst case is this is the way we've always done it.
And to be honest, I'm often asked to come in because something's wrong, and it's never that thing that's wrong. It's always something else. It is, and it doesn't take very long to really, again, because of that 70% pattern matching, you can pretty much come in and go, right, well, here's the situation, and present it back and saying, here's what I'm seeing when that's actually happening. And I had one CEO cry when I did that moment after about 2 weeks of being in his business, because I said, well, here's what's actually happening. Here's what I've changed so far. Here's some things that we need to work on in the long term. And he just burst into tears because he said, I can't believe that you have articulated what I've suspected, but I can never see because I'm in it, or I'm too busy going this direction or being pulled into the weeds. So it's just this clarity moment where we bring the situation. This is your situation. And that's one of the things that I'm trying to put into Astronaut as well, is your situational awareness. I have a constant map of where we're at any one time, and I can project into the future, and I can look into the past as well. So the military and emergency response units deal with situational awareness as a model all the time. Like, they need to know where all their supplies are, where their humans are at any one time. Yep. But we don't really treat businesses the same. We're just like, let's roll, let's just wing it, let's just keep going. And I'm sure it will sort itself out. Whereas I think if we can keep hold of that situation and have clarity of where everything is at any one time, we'll be able to respond to changes or even predict them, hopefully. Hopefully,
well, that would be the best case if you can predict things.
Well, yeah, that's where we're going. I say it tentatively, but like, one of the things as a COO you do is run the scenarios. You say, what if we go into this country versus this country? Or yep. What if we hire now versus not at all? What's the impact of that? And so constantly I'm producing 5 scenarios at all times.
Yep.
And saying, what about this? What about this? And the CEO and myself usually are going, well, this is the higher likelihood. Let's give this one a crack. And it's just this constant scenario modeling. Yep. So I think people have a bit of a bent for that, or they don't. And I want to try and build that process within Astronaut as well, so that people can actually get a bit more visibility of impact of these decisions in both the short and long term.
Mm-hmm. And so, that probably comes down to just having enough data to run simulations, almost. Exactly. And the data isn't just internal or external. It's all of those things together, and the history of time. Yep. So some of our customers at the moment, some have been in business for a long time, and so they've got a lot of historical data. And what they were missing is the market and competitor data and the human day-to-day data in that as well. So by bringing those things all together, they can now say, well, based on this and where the market is moving, here are your options. So I think it's going to change the game of how risk-averse some of us are, but also have more certainty to make those decisions, because it will come with, here are all the possible scenarios and the risks that and opportunities that come with that. Whereas at the moment, I think we, again, like I said at the beginning, we're gut feeling this, and too many of us are, myself included. Yeah, most of my decisions are probably gut feel. So for any startups that are out there and are starting to feel sort of those shakes and wobbles in the way things are operating, and they don't know whether they can afford to budget for a CEO or even a fractional one at this point, what are some key things that you can probably suggest before they make that leap to, say, reach out to yourself and bring someone on board?
Yeah, I think one of the things to realize is that you're not a special unicorn, and I know that sounds bad, but there are a lot of journeys that are the same. And if you're a particular company, let's say you're a SaaS company and you're in this particular moment in time, you can probably quite quickly find more information about how others have experienced that and what they've done to move past it. Mm-hmm. So there's the patterns are just so similar that you can probably see it coming a little bit. If you think about the stage you're in, not just the situation you're in, but the stage. There are probably 5 or 6 things where the wheels start falling off it, and it's common for all SaaS companies. So even just searching for what happens at that stage and how they might move through it would be a good start. Outside of that, typically, and this is from my experience, typically people have come and said, oh, my team aren't delivering as well as they used to. And they're like, you should come and give them a smack. And generally that's not what's happening. Yeah. I've never met a technology team that's just faffing about at all. So it's unlikely to be the problem. So I would probably say think harder about what the underlying root cause of these symptoms might be. For instance, usually when that's happening, it's because either the product is being developed in such a way that it's got technical debt, or it has it's going at a pace that the previous pace is not the same, so it's actually breaking and getting fragile and brittle, or the quantity of things that are being built are just too much for that team now, right? So there's some common patterns, and that's not all of them, but that's a few, right? So looking at how you might be able to streamline that, reduce the scope of what's happening. Usually around that time, you're getting a lot more customers and they want new, interesting, better things. That doesn't mean you should build everything that comes up. So getting tighter around product management. So you can see what I mean by the patterns there. It's just the same stuff all the time, right? Just a different product.
That's what we've seen in the podcast. It's everyone thinks they're the first person to have ever encountered the problem they're facing. And it's the same problem with different time, different people, different team, different product, but the same things occur. So
the same things occur. It's the same pattern. It's just a question of timing. When is it happening?
Realizing that I'm not being attacked by the world or whatever it may be, and that's causing this problem.
Or it's not just that idiot over there who's not towing the line. It's not any of that. It's not about you, I'm sorry to say. But that means that you have lots of options to find help, because if you found someone who's gone through that stage, other CEOs or founders, find someone who's now in Series 8, tell me how you got through this stage, because I'm sure you had it. They'll probably bring you some pro tips. The other thing I would say is advisors. Have as many advisors as you need. Don't think you should do this by yourself. In particular, you shouldn't do this by yourself because you're a founder who's had that great idea in that specific area. But that isn't how you're going to run a business, manage a business, or keep a business healthy. You need advice from people who've done it before, or people who have skills that you don't have. Like, I highly recommend getting a fractional CFO or a virtual CFO if you can, if you're not in the money mindset. Highly recommend it. And it's cheap. You can get that for a few hours a week, and that will actually make a return in that investment very quickly. So things like that, just don't be afraid to get help. Please don't be afraid, because it's mental health-wise, it's terrible.
You can only do so many things yourself, and you can only then put as much effort as you have experience into it as well. So leveraging the others for that small cost is going to be huge returns.
And the other thing with that is, as a CEO, you've got at this stage, you've got one job to do, and it's like sell everything, get that out there. And one thing is about prioritization. And not being afraid to not do some things. Just say, I'm not doing that. Or you can do that, or we're dropping it completely. We feel that we must fill in every gap. We feel we must do all the things at every layer of the business. But ultimately, I find the most successful people I work with have been able to focus on the very pointy end of their business, which is usually making sales, getting those customers on board to prove out your case, and then getting investors to believe that story too. Right? Those two things in a startup, and a SaaS startup in particular, are probably key. And then ensuring that you're really getting the direction across to the humans working in your business, so that they are on board and trying their hardest to achieve that with you. Those are the things that I would focus on above all else. To me, I would also add the people in there, like helping the people do their best work is vital to balancing the execution. When I think of strategy, I think strategy, execution, and timing are the trio of things. And you can have all the execution in the world, but if you've missed the boat because it's too late, equally you can have the best strategy, but if you're not actually executing on it, then it's just, it's nothing. So your job as a founder, as a CEO, is to sell the dream of those things happening, and then get out of their way.
Just focus on what you do well and let the team run, and make sure you put the right controls in place to make sure it's operating as it needs to be.
Exactly.
So if anyone wants to reach out to you, Diana, because they're in that crucial position where they want to take that leap to the next level, how can they do that?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty happy to talk to anyone about where they're at in that position and give them advice. I also run in New Zealand and a bit in Australia the VCXO directory, and so that is a place where you can find fractional executives across the board, and it's vcxo.directory. And so you can either ping me via that, or else you can just email me or LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to point you in the direction of tools and templates and other advisors and networks as well. So absolutely happy. I mean, if we can help startups get past this moment, we'll have a higher percentage being successful over the longer term. Yep. Many fall out at that phase because it's the moment, the most important moment in a startup, until it's the next moment, of course.
Of course. Well, we'll add those links into the show notes for the episode. And once again, Diana, thank you for joining me on an episode of the DevReady Podcast. It's been a pleasure.
No worries. Thanks so much. Yes, great chats.
Thank you.